Then we need to be able to wire it correctly into the engine. Now I know this doesn't look like much, but this is just a little plug and it works. But all of the systems will have to have a positive and negative wire going to them so that the water can be charged.
If I have to ask a question, before you get to this point, where exactly do you place the canister itself?
You know, that's a great question. Unfortunately, on this diagram, it's hard for me to give you any solid direction, but
I assume each car is different.
It is. It's going to really be different, and what you're doing is you're looking for a place in your car where you have enough room to put the canister in an upright position, whether it's a glass jar or some other model, but our canisters fit the way they have to be in the position they're in. Mm-hmm. You're looking for a spot in there that you can put them in underneath the hood and have them secured. Sometimes we'll use cardboard and bungee cords. Sometimes we can do a little bit more elaborate installs. And that's really great if you can find a nice clean spot. Sometimes it gets kind of dirty underneath there. And so the best advice I can give you is to just, start with the vacuum line. Find a great vacuum line. You want to be within 3 feet of the vacuum line if you can. It's not ultra critical, but it helps. And then get a spot in there where it's not too hot so that the unit doesn't boil over, and that it is safely and securely in there. And there's usually some place in the system that underneath the hood that you can find a spot to put it in. That's about the best advice I can give you. It's just so different. It just depends on the car, really. But we always seem to find a spot for it. And that's another great thing about our product. We have the different sizes. So if you know that you're going to be dealing with a engine compartment that's really cramped, or that you have plenty of room, we can help you find a product that will work in your car, usually a lot easier sometimes than if you're just using a mason jar kit, which of course the mason jar kits, you can get great results out of those as well. Okay, having said that, the next thing that becomes very important to me when I'm looking under the engine is, where is the electrical wiring harness of the car? Where are the spots that I can tie into to get a good ground? The ground's usually easy to find, and I'll explain that in a second. But the power of the car, where do I get in and get a good power? Now, it's important to note that these water hybrid systems will pull a different amount of amps. And I guess this is as good a time as any to explain what we mean by pulling amps. Now, if you will consider that, say for instance, this little unit right here represents the alternator. The alternator basically generates the electrical power for the car. And in your car, it takes gasoline to turn the engine. It takes fuel to turn the belts that turn the alternator. So that energy is not free. So if we put a unit in your car that creates hydroxy gas, but also requires a tremendous amount of amperage and voltage in order to produce that gas, then we're going to get negative results.
Or zero results.
Or zero.
You're countering your
That's
savings.
right. That's exactly right. So we have found that in our units pull anywhere from about 7 amps to 3 amps. And you're probably safe without some other assistance anywhere to 15 amps or less. Wouldn't you agree with that, Walter, probably? Yeah, I mean, your average stereo is usually around 10 to 15 amps. If you get one of those, really cool stereo systems put in your car, then they'll go with amps and stuff. They'll put a power inverter in there, and that will take the 12 volts and invert it into a higher power amperage. And I know that there are people out there that are selling systems that use power inverters so that those systems can get more amperage. Fortunately, though, our systems don't require that, and most of the kit systems that you find on the internet or the ones that you build at home are going to function very well for 7 amps or less.
Carl, I have a question. Our units are protected, right? They're fused. our units are protected.
I'm going to recommend to you, by the way, why don't you show their little fuse case. It doesn't have a fuse in it at the moment, but here you go. You see here, there's a fuse right on the outside of the unit. And this right here goes to the unit, and it would just attach to this plug right here. Actually, it goes this way in the car. And we specifically designed this, and many of the systems out there design it with a little plug so you can pull it apart, and you can take this part of the system out for service, to fill it up or to clean it, whatever needs to be done. And we can talk a little bit more about the maintenance required for the system in a few minutes. But that's right, we do have a fuse. And ours, I load all of them with a 10 amp fuse. And it's very unusual that I would hear about somebody blowing that. Usually if they blow the fuse, they've installed it improperly. Okay, all right, so the first thing I do on any install is I look for and find a vacuum line. Then I start looking for the wiring harness of the car, the electrical system, and I want to get underneath the hood and get a good look at. Now on this chart, I have drawn a representative wiring harness in this blue-green line. So normally what will happen is near the driver's side of the car, often you'll see a rubber boot, usually something like that size, that a black wire like this, but probably much larger, which is a coil of a bunch of wires stranded together, will be coming out, and it will lead all around the engine, going to, like I'm showing here, maybe an air conditioner, the alternator, the battery, the headlights. I don't have the battery on here, but I'm sure you'll be aware. Well, what I do is I will find, let's say I'm looking in there and I'll say, okay, here's the line coming off the alternator. I'll follow it around until I get back. I'm looking for a spot that I can pull this wire inside, this internal wire here, through the firewall of the car into the passenger compartment. Because inside the passenger compartment, I'm going to hook up to the power and our little black box control panel that goes on the dash. And so the first thing I look for is the wiring harness. Then I go and follow it back to a rubber boot, in which case I'll measure off as much of this as I'm going to need, pull out the excess that I don't need, and send this black, red, white, and green wire. I'll send it back through the wiring harness, the same hole through the wiring harness. And actually, to be honest with you, I highly recommend, if you're going to do one of these installs, whether you would do it with one of our kits or the kits that you'll find many different places, or you make one, just get an old wire hanger, bend it over, and stick the wire hanger right through that boot, and you'll find it goes right, usually, if everything's good, it goes right through the firewall into the passenger compartment of the car. So, for example, in this case, I would push the wire through here and string it over so that the plug reaches wherever the canister is on the unit. The other thing...
And what is the other tight part there? Yes.
Oh, I was just about to say.
Why?
Yeah, this part right here will go to any bolt or any spot that goes directly to the frame or the steel chassis of the car. So anywhere in the engine compartment that you can get directly grounded to the car. This is your ground. And so we usually send them with one of these little grommets, but you can get these at Radio Shack, or there's a lot of different places you can get them. So one will need to go to the ground, and the other end in our unit, the white wire eventually ends up going into the ignition, where it's able to be turned off and on and powered. Okay, so in a nutshell, there's basically a few major components that you need to be concerned about when you're doing the install. One, you want to find a good spot in the vacuum system that's behind the MAF I'm sorry, I mispronounced that earlier. It's MAF sensor, MAF, and MAP sensor, MAP.